Okay, so we've played this game now, and hopefully you've gotten a little bit better understanding of how this works, especially the difference between the CRC, the carbon removal certificate, and the Nori token, and how those interact, and how these different roles might interact with each other. And so we're going to walk through two different paths through this. And like I said this morning, this is still very, very early for us. We fully expect this to change quite a bit, but I want to show this to you in the state that it's in now so that we can get the feedback from you and help answer questions, help find where we've made assumptions that were incorrect, that sort of thing. I'm going to start, I want to show the full life cycle of a CRC. So naturally that starts with the suppliers. So on the supplier landing page, you would see the video that we saw this morning and a walkthrough describing how this process is going to work. So for the suppliers, it's a 4-step process. For the regenerative agriculture practicers, you're going to have to work with one of our data aggregator partners to gather data about your farming practices, insert that into the model, and get back data that reports on setting a baseline and recording how much carbon dioxide equivalent has been stored in your soil since the beginning of the baseline time period. So that's actually going to happen outside of our platform, and I'll tell you about that in a second. The second step is that the CRCs that you create need to be verified, and we're going to spend quite a bit of the time tomorrow discussing in detail how that's going to actually work in practice. But just for the sake of what we're seeing here, just assume that that's happening outside. Is it difficult to read?
Yeah, I think she was hoping to get the font size.
No, the problem is the resolution of the projector.
Command plus.
No, that's not actually going to work in this case because of the way that the design is working.
Sorry.
I'll read these out. So tell us about your farming practices. Beneath that, we have different questions, sort of frequently asked questions. And this is us guessing at what these questions might be. What data are you collecting about my farm? How do I submit my data? Who can see my data? How will you pay me? What can I do to maximize my profit? In the second step, a verifier will analyze your records. How do I establish my carbon baseline? Who are these verifiers? How long is this all going to take? How much is this going to cost me? And what if I have been collecting my own soil samples, what do I do with those? After the CRCs are verified, they're going to be listed for sale in our queue. So the questions are, what's a carbon removal certificate? What can I do with a CRC? What's the listing fee? How are you protecting my new assets? What does first in, first out mean? We'll explain all that as we look at it. The last step is collecting Nori tokens when your CRCs are sold. So what can I do with Nori tokens? What's Nori's cut? How does Nori make money? Can I find my own buyers? What if I want to remove a listing? And what if down the road I want to sell my land? So after you've landed on this and you decided you want to move forward with it, you're going to enroll in the application and basically create an account. We have Keith Poshton here. He's going to be talking tomorrow on one of the panels from Comet Farm. So Comet Farm is one of the data aggregator partners I mentioned. What we're looking at here is a sign-in form to connect to Comet Farm so that you can pull in the farm data that you've uploaded into their application into ours. And what you're seeing in this graph is just, this is a sample of what you might get back from Comet Farm, and you definitely can't read the labels on it. That's fine. The lines that are in the past are your baseline, and the forecasted lines in the future are showing you're looking at the difference between these curves and below 0, which is here, of how anything below that is negative carbon emissions. So that's actually removing carbon dioxide. So you're going to connect your account to Comet Farm. We're going to get the data back from them. And now we're going to see data from 2 different properties that you have uploaded to Comet Farm. We've set your baseline beginning in spring 2012. Your total acreage is 1,968 acres. In that time, when you combine carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide that is stored in the ground, so the total carbon dioxide equivalent, we're looking at 7,552 tons of CO2 removed. And down here, we're showing what the current market price of the Nori token is trading at, and what, if you were to have that number of tokens, what you would sell them at today, that value. So we just finished creating your account. Okay, so you've submitted your records, and now you're awaiting verification. And down here, these are the same 4 steps that we saw on the first screen. So we've submitted the estimate. So let's go look in our account and see more information about the transaction. Right now, we see that the records are being verified. You don't have any Nori tokens in your balance right now. And this is still the current market price because it's the same day. You submitted these today, April 26th. And we can see here just our sort of based on past history, our estimate on how long this verification process is going to take. Clicking on this button would pull up some information about what data you've submitted. So we're going to pretend this is like a cooking show, and we're going to fast forward a few days. All right, it's May 3rd now, and your verifier has verified the CRCs that you submitted. And what we see below here is a number that's definitely not legible, which says there are 49,299 CRCs ahead of you in the queue. Now, the queue is the CRCs that are available for sale. So when you are listing your CRCs, they go to the back of the queue. And when you are buying your CRCs, you are simply buying however many you want from the front of the queue. So this is showing that these 49,299 have to sell before yours will be put up and available for sale. Over here, it's a few days later, the price of the token has changed. It's $6.39 now. This is a button, the verifier's report, that would show information about what the verifier had done. I don't have anything to show you here because we still don't know exactly what that's going to look like. It's now a day or two later, and we can see that 28% of the CRCs have sold because we've gotten to the front of the queue, and now the buyers are working their way through your CRCs one at a time. You've sold 2,114 of them so far. You have that many tokens, which at the current trading price of $6.39, it's worth about $13,500. So we're going to fast forward again. You finished selling all of your CRCs. Today's date is May 8th, and you have sold all 7,552 CRCs. The token is worth $8.01, and that comes out to $60,000. You now have the choice of either holding onto your tokens, like we saw in the game, or you could try to exchange them for US dollars. Now, there are a lot of intricacies around exchanging a token like this for US dollars. The regulators in every country are still working out how this process works. We have a button here that says exchange for USD. This would probably go to some explainer page. We would love to be able to provide the ability for having this happen sort of directly through our application, but we expect that when we launch the application for the first time, that you would have to go to a third-party exchange to exchange from your tokens to dollars. So that's the life cycle of a CRC from a supplier side. So now we're going to take a look at the buyer's end of the picture and what that looks like. So we're back at the home page. Buyers start here. We have a very similar landing page that explains how this process works. You can see the video of what Nori is doing. So understanding our marketplace, questions like how is this different from the existing carbon offset markets? What the heck is blockchain and why should I care? Who are these suppliers and what are they doing? How is Nori making money on this? How many Nori tokens should I buy to reverse my carbon emissions? The Nori guarantee. We haven't really discussed this much yet in the conference so far, but Nori is planning to insure the purchases of the buyers and make the buyers whole. So if it's found in the future from an audit that the number of CRCs that were issued to a supplier don't actually represent the number of tons that have been removed, that there are fewer tons, then we have a couple different methods for holding back a reserve fund that can purchase new CRCs from the front of the queue and assign those to the previous buyer so that the buyer can trust that when you buy CRCs from us, you are actually paying for that amount of CO2 removed. So the questions here, what is a carbon removal certificate? How can I be sure that I'm buying something real? Who are these verifiers and what are they doing? Can I pick my own supplier? Can I use my own verifier from another project? And then lastly is the purchase process, purchasing CRCs with Nori tokens. Asking questions like, can't I buy certificates with a credit card? Where can I get these tokens? What impacts the price of my tokens? What if I decide I don't need all of my tokens? And can I buy certificates for someone else? So we're going to jump forward and try to buy some. What we see at the top here, there are 50,786 CRCs available for purchase in the queue. A reminder that one Nori token is always going to purchase one CRC, which is always equivalent to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent removed. And we're asking, how many certificates would you like to purchase? There are two options here. One is to use the maximum amount from your token balance. So you already, in this case, in this scenario, you already have 5,023 Nori tokens in your wallet that are available to use. Or you could decide that you want to buy a different amount. So we're going to say that you want to buy 2,000 tokens. And we're going to click purchase. Because this is a blockchain application, transactions don't happen instantaneously. They take a few seconds to confirm on the network, and that's the real, as far as the data of who owns what, that's the verification process. So there are multiple layers of verification within this whole application. There's verification of the CO2, and there's verification of the data as you transfer ownership of the CRC from the supplier to the buyer. And so that's what's happening right now, and that's why we see an in progress here. Once that transaction is confirmed, we now can see that the transaction was successful. So let's go take a look at those in our account. And we see that we've purchased 2,000 CRCs, and that's our balance. And our balance of Nori tokens has deducted by 2,000. And the remaining that you have are at $4.12 per token, or worth $12,000. We can see some information about the CRCs that you just purchased. We can see that the method that was used for them was regenerative agriculture. We can see where they were done, and you could go look at the verifier's report to verify this. And in the future, we'd want to build upon this so that this is actually easily accessible for anyone you want to be able to display this data to. So if you're a buyer, you're a corporation, and you want to be including this information in your CSR report, for example, you want to make it available to the public so that the public can come in and audit you, that you actually paid for carbon removal, we would make all of this available in a very easy graphical way. So that's the end of the buyer flow. It's a pretty simple and straightforward process. So those are the two flows that we wanted to show you. And now I think Alessandra has is going to collect cards. Christoph has some. Okay, you buy from the front of the line, but might corporate buyers want to choose projects to support that resonate with their values, like they can in the voluntary market right now? It's our belief that one of the barriers to entry that makes it difficult for more and more transactions to happen in the voluntary carbon markets is because of the bespoke nature that requires business development from a supplier to a buyer. You have to work with brokers and consultants and multiple layers of middlemen to make that transaction happen. But if it's so simple that a supplier is simply interacting with a web application like this, and then Nori is doing the work of bringing the buyers to the table, the way that we do that is by creating this first in, first out queue. Because of the insurance method that we're employing here, and we use this phrase, a ton is a ton is a ton, meaning that when we say that a ton of CO2 has been removed, we can back that up with all of the data about it, and as well as our insurance mechanism. And we believe that that is the method to ensure that what you're buying is actually credible for that. This is a trade-off decision to make, so it's something to consider. More? So this is saying that my comment that an external third-party exchange, oh, wait, am I reading this right, Sean? An external exchange would reduce demand for token. Who will the exchange be, and how easy would it be to exchange Nori to something like Ether or Bitcoin to dollars? And could Nori use Bitcoin or Ether futures to hedge liquidity risk to increase this demand? Maybe? So who will the exchanges be? That's up to the third-party exchanges to choose to list our token or not. One thing that we're doing, we've said it already, we are aiming to be fully legally compliant with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is a difficult and interesting task, and that requires exchange-related, SEC-regulated brokerage exchanges to facilitate that. So those are coming and are going to be available, but they're not there right now. So this is something that we're dependent on. On the futures question, I'm going to punt on that one. We can talk about that later. Can the seller reject a buyer they don't like? No, not in this design. We're trying to commoditize carbon dioxide. We're trying to move past these other tangible things around these carbon offset, carbon removal projects that exist. What we're trying to do is increase and accelerate the rate at which carbon dioxide is removed, and so we're trying to accelerate the transactions. And by making these transactions far more fungible and more liquid and happening more and more and more, we're using that to help increase demand for the market on both sides. So in this case, it wouldn't be, you would just be selling to the next buyer that buys them. Can a buyer reject a seller? Same answer. Will buyers and sellers be rated? Whoever asked this one, can you clarify for me? Yeah.
If I'm buying something on Amazon or on, whatever, and I'm going to be reliable, if you're going to be application with your members, is that a useful thing, or is Nori taking on that whole risk?
It's a bit of both. We are planning in certain cases where fraud is detected and caught of using a blacklist so that those participants could never again come participate in the marketplace. But that is also part of what Nori is building into that insurance mechanism. No, yeah. Is there a tool on the platform that will help me to estimate my carbon dioxide footprint? That's something that we have talked about and could totally add. There are a lot of tools like that out there, and they're difficult to make. Some people are probably better at that than others, and especially probably better at that than us. So that's something that we could look into.
Could I just add, the first aggregator we're working with, Comet Farms, does provide that service. So that's not part of what we're asking them to do for us, but anybody who wants to go through that exercise on their own and get further information there.
So the second question is, what about guarantees for sellers? If I choose to sell one Nori, and I think this actually means one CRC. If I choose to sell one CRC when the price of the Nori token is $10, but by the time my order gets through the queue, the price is now $4 per token, which price do I get? Well, in fact, at this point, you don't get either because all you have is the Nori token. And at this point, once you have the Nori token, then you are free to either sell at the current market price, and it might go up, it might go down, depending on the market conditions. So the price that you get for the Nori token is whatever the price of the token is when you sell that in these third-party exchanges. When the price of the Nori token at the time of when you sell the CRC for the Nori token is sort of less relevant unless you plan on selling the token immediately. If a CRC is equivalent to a Nori token, why have both? Why not just simplify and have one? Our hope was that by playing the game that helped illustrate the difference between the two. So the carbon removal certificate is the asset that represents the action that was taken, and we're separating out the pricing mechanism. one of the interesting aspects of the token is that it's so liquid. And liquidity is a really good thing when we're talking about trying to build up a market of demand for this thing. We're trying to take this thing that is currently non-existent and worth nothing and make it worth something so that there is value created for these suppliers that are taking these actions. By separating them out, we create that liquidity with the token. And so if you are a buyer, you have the option of buying tokens at what you think might be a cheap price, and then holding on to them, and then using them in the future like a gift card to purchase the CRCs when you want to take credit for purchasing those. So if you buy the token at $1 like it was in the first round, and then you buy CRCs a year from now and the price has gone up to $8, well, you just got a $7 discount relative to the current market price. And same thing on the other side. If you are a supplier, we envision potential intermediaries who are helping to sort of smooth out some of the volatility in this. So let's say that there is an investor group, a fund that wants to promise to a supplier, we will pay you a fixed fee for your CRCs, and we will sell the CRCs into the marketplace, and we will try to make profit on the Nori token once we receive those, but we're going to guarantee you a price. If that sort of thing happens, now like what we're doing by separating these out is creating the conditions under which something like that might be possible. And if we just had one token, we also lose the ability of retiring the certificate so that it can't be traded again. I buy a ton, my money is received, I get a token and a note about the project. The tons at a later date are reversed. What happens next? Who is going to make good on the tons that have been voided? Nori will. So there are a couple different ways that we've discussed doing that. One is the insurance pool that I mentioned earlier. So we'll have a pool of tokens set aside and then we'll be continuously contributing to that from when we take revenue, which I don't recall if I mentioned, but the way that Nori makes money in this whole process is that we charge a small transaction fee on the buyer. So if you're a buyer and you're buying 10 CRCs, you're going to pay 10 Nori tokens plus some small amount more that represents the transaction fee that we're taking. So part of that transaction fee will be put into this reserve pool so that we're continuously replenishing that as it's needed. The other method is through different ways of, on the back. Actually, I don't think we're ready to explain this one yet, this idea, Alden. Do you agree?
I think we're ready, but I think it would take another half day, so.
We have another way of trying to do this.
We have a pretty sophisticated risk management strategy. The key difference between us and traditional markets is the buyer does not carry limits, which is the existing model of all of the existing markets. Let's have to make this an excuse for another meeting so we can actually do this, because I'm really excited about how we're doing it.
Yeah. What if I, as a buyer, want to buy only CRCs that were created through geologic sequestration? Again, the way to commoditize this is to insist that a ton is a ton is a ton, and we instead rely on the verification methods that we are working on and want your feedback on to improve upon to ensure that the permanence problem is taken care of. I'm assuming that would be the motivation behind wanting to only purchase that sort of CRC. Yeah.
Could I just add that just as you've heard prior examples of Paul saying if we create this platform that works this way, we could expect the market to respond in different ways. If you were serious that you only wanted to buy a certain class of CRCs, you would become one of those third parties who goes directly to that class of CRC suppliers, commits to be assigned the title to their CRCs and list them yourself. So technically out of the queue, you'll be getting first out, but you know what you put in. See what I'm saying? We don't have to tell you how to do that. Once we launch our platform, I think it'll take you about 5 minutes to figure that out. And that's a perfectly reasonable market response from ours.
Do farmers get any credits for carbon removal they have done in the past for good practices implemented? So one of the challenges that we face is we want to get this marketplace up and running, and our goal is to do this by the end of the year. But in order to do that, we have to have inventory available for sale at the start. And we discussed this in the white paper if you had a chance to read it. And we discussed that we would have to whitelist early buyers because we're far more concerned of running out of supply in the early days than we are about having enough demand. The way that we get enough supply right now, because especially we'll talk more about it tomorrow, but for growers that start practicing regenerative agriculture right now, there has to be a period of time after the beginning of it in order to actually say that you've removed carbon dioxide. So we plan to initially grandfather in suppliers who have an established data record of implementing these practices back somewhere probably in the range of 5 years or so. That's still an open question. And that's where we saw in the supplier flow that we were baselining data back to 2012. So in this case, yes. I think there's another. As a supplier, how can you mitigate the risk that the token price goes down by the time your CRCs reach the front of the queue? Can you set a floor? So again, we're trying to create this environment where intermediaries could solve that problem for you. That's not a problem that Nori is going to be solving directly, but we're trying to create the fair marketplace where different actors might choose to make these deals on the side that help finance or capitalize a supplier that's going to take action in this way. At what point are the carbon credits retired? At what point are they retired forever? This is a concept from traditional markets that ensures uniqueness and that credits can only be retired once. Once the buyer purchases them and they show up in your queue here, they're retired. They're done. They can't be transferred anymore.
Can I just say, right, allegedly. I'm really sorry there are someone out there that's took a scratch at Friday, but I can't have Paul try to figure them out. But yeah, right, allegedly.
My company, this person is presenting a scenario. My company would like to clear cut Amazon forest and then plant palm oil trees that capture and sequester a lot of CO2. Is that okay? That's an interesting ethical question, and I'm not going to put some sort of value judgment on that. And this is a good time, but this is a good time to bring up that these methodologies that we want to develop, we're trying to develop these entirely out in the open. So on our GitHub repository, we have implemented what we're calling the Nori improvement proposals, where anyone, whether it's us or one of you or anyone else, can propose a new methodology and how to measure and verify a new methodology of carbon removal. And these are things that would be open to community discussion. So for something like this that has interesting ethical concerns, that discussion and communication can happen out in the open, and we can make that decision collectively as a community.
Can I ask you a question if I didn't understand the previous answers?
Sure.
You said that a carbon credit was retired. And so I just want to make sure I understand that. I am Corporation A who wants to buy carbon offsets. So I buy a certain number of Nori tokens. Then 3 years later, I'm in a cash crunch, and my board is saying, what can you liquidate? And Nori tokens are trading at $12.10. Can I then sell those tokens into a market? Can I offer them for sale?
The CRCs. So you had Nori tokens and you purchased CRCs, and now you're asking at a future date, are you able to liquidate those CRCs?
That's right. And the answer there is no.
That's correct. Yeah, no, you won't be able to. Yeah, these are, we're treating these as consumables. Oh, are you going to limit the number of CRCs to Nori to ensure that CRCs are fresh or recent vintage? I'm not sure what are you going to limit the number, who asked this question? Wolf. So are you going to limit the number of CRCs to Nori? What do you mean by that?
So, if I'm a buyer and I don't want credit from 2008, I want credit from the year of the emissions that I'm trying to offset. So I want to keep things fresh, and that's the decision from my board or from the community to do that. So if you have an excess of CRC sitting up there in Nori, they can get old, right? They come in the back of the queue. There's a million Nori tokens before that. By the time you sell a million, you might be 2 years later. So that's what I'm asking. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. So there are two answers to that. One is that they're just going to continue moving through the queue. So the oldest will be at the front of the queue, and the newest should be at the back of the queue by nature of how that first in, first out works. And the other thing is that, again, as I was saying earlier, we're trying to commoditize CO2 so that if we can prove that and verify that it has been stored in a permanent fashion, it should not matter at all in any way, shape, or form whether that happened in 2008 or 2012 or 2018, because what matters is that it was in the atmosphere and it isn't anymore. Does the value of a token respond to market forces? I sure hope so. What drives change in token value? Well, this is an interesting question, especially if you're not familiar with existing cryptocurrency markets. And I could talk for a week and never give you a full, straight answer. It's our goal to, as closely as possible, link the value of the token to the value of removing 1 ton of CO2. There are lots of different market forces that affect cryptocurrencies. Things like, what are the trading pairs? So if you're used to foreign exchange markets, you're always trading one currency against another currency. There are things like, are we as Nori proving to the world that we are actually removing CO2 and it isn't turning out that these are fraudulent or leaking or anything like that. So it's kind of built into our business model to try to tie this value as closely as possible. But it is subject to market forces, and that's really kind of the whole point. Because I think like the magic of what we're doing here, the most interesting piece of what we're doing is that we're creating a single market-driven price on carbon, which is something that economists have been saying for decades that we need in order to attack this problem. How do I sell Nori tokens strategically? It seems the queue is automatic and sales are continuous. So these are conflating, I think, the token and the CRC. So I hope that what the suppliers in the game took away from it was that the optimal strategy for a supplier is always sell your CRCs for Nori tokens as soon as you possibly can. Because then you get the Nori token, and now you have optionality. You can sell the token right away, or you can hold it and sell it at a later date. That is how you get the strategy built into that. You want to follow up? Oh. Thank you. What if the queue is empty? That's a problem. And and we recognize that's one of the most serious issues we would face here, because then you have the value of the token, which is driven by market forces, and if the market believes that we are not able to follow through on our promise of having CRCs available for sale, then I would expect the market to lose faith in Nori. So it's very, very important that we do continuous business development, and we work with all of you to develop new methodologies as rapidly as possible to continue to bring in more supply. I think there are other measures that we can consider and that we'd want your feedback on around, like, when we launch, we are whitelisting buyers. So we're going to pre-arrange with potential buyers how many CRCs they want to buy in the first year and when that transaction is going to happen. And we're going to kind of shepherd the market along in the early days to make sure that this scenario doesn't happen. So the CRC goes from, the value goes from CRC to a token to dollars. Our CRC is priced the same, meaning exchangeable for Nori tokens in different jurisdictions. And is the CRC pricing universal? So one CRC, one Nori token, always and forever, doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in. The Nori token, however, could trade for different amounts depending on what currency you want. If you want dollars, if you want euros, if you want yuan, if you want pounds, if you want Bitcoin, the value of that exchange is always going to be relative to that. So it's just up to you to choose to decide what you want to cash out with. How will Nori set the price for the first CRC, and how is the price determined? That's a good question. So again, the CRC Nori token is always one-to-one. The strategy for the token sale, we talked about this in the white paper, and it was sort of sparse on details, and I get that. We are facing an interesting challenge here, because if we, the way that traditionally these blockchain companies who are doing similar models to what we're doing are you create a certain number of tokens. You might have some built-in algorithm that defines if new tokens are created over time or if tokens are destroyed over time. You might build that in and announce that in the early stages. And then these companies offer these tokens for sale to the public or to accredited investors, depending on how they go about their sale. And they sell the tokens to these early stage investors at what they believe is probably some discounted price. It's not at, it's very similar to an IPO that would sell initial shares at a certain price. So how do those do it? Well, they have underwriters that determine what the expected market value might be. Nori plans to do a legally compliant token sale, and we are, as mentioned, working with the regulators to make sure that we do that in the correct and proper way. The tokens will be sold initially before the market is launched. Well, what we're looking at right now is probably a two-stage sale, assuming that we can get the approval from the SEC to do so. But we would have tokens out in the market being traded and having a price set on them before the first CRC for Nori transaction occurs. What prevents Nori from printing excess tokens or holding them back to artificially manipulate the market? Yeah, the regulators. That can be done in a legal way, and that can also be done in a software code way. So we can actually open source that. I mean, we are open sourcing all of our code, but we can prove that to you in the software code so that that can't actually happen. Or it will happen based on whatever plan we initiate at the beginning will happen, so that everything goes the way it's expected to. How will the total number of tokens change over time? Yeah, that's still being determined. And if you have ideas on managing the token supply, we want to hear them.
You can write it on a feedback card.
What prevents me from selling my sequestered carbon on multiple markets, assuming other markets are created? This is where the role of the verifier comes in, and the role of those blacklists that I mentioned. So if it's discovered that you're double dipping on multiple markets, you're immediately blacklisted, and then that would, and if we found that those were sold elsewhere, then the insurance mechanism would come into play as well. So we're intending to watch for that and, again, make the buyers whole. How often do you verify that the carbon remains sequestered? That's going to be unique for every different methodology. For the soil carbon methodology, we're looking at regular audits on the scale of maybe every 3, well, you have to upload data every year is kind of what we're initially talking about.
Data every year, verify at least every 2 years, and then a subsequent audit, 60-day audit, at least every 10 years.
And the discussion about this, we want to happen with all of you on our GitHub repository. And so we'll make sure that that's known to you. Do you have follow-ups?
Yeah, so if you're a farmer and after a 3-year audit you lost what was sequestered, what happens then?
That's when the insurance mechanism comes in.
But as the supplier, you don't get penalized?
Well,
You could get reduced depending on the circumstances. But the other thing we are currently, this is, again, we're looking for input. This is a fully transparent market. You would choose to publish your baseline after the 3 years of sequestration claims, and you can't force everybody else in the world to take that seriously. But our intention would be that everybody else in the world would not let you risk anywhere else with a proposal to generate credits from a baseline that is lower than the last baseline you got credit for in our market. So we're trying to introduce a discipline that we can only cover our market, but if people pay attention to it, it should create a global system.
Related to that, if I have a project that, say, pulls CO2 out or destroys methane, am I subsidizing the farmers then there could be reversals with the farm by paying into some sort of insurance fund?
I'm not sure I follow, because you mentioned destroying methane, which threw me off. Can you repeat that?
If I have a project that is pulling CO2 directly, sequestering it, or even destroying it, am I funding, and the farm has to go for 20 years, and there's higher risk around that, so there's a discount to that ton, right? Are other projects subsidizing that in a certain way?
I mean, in some way you could say yes, because you're contributing to the overall growth of the marketplace, which helps increase demand from the buy side so that those CRCs would want to be sold. What we want to have happen as an outcome for this is that different methodologies that are verifiable and removing CO2 are competing with each other on marginal cost, so that we're trying to incentivize everyone to make the most profit while doing this. And if one methodology of removal is less costly than another methodology of removal, then I would expect to see the market shift towards meeting that sort of demand.
My response to that is I'll see you in the bar, because that's starting the conversation that we want to have, that we're not being secretive about, but it's too long to start and this is our.
Is the expectation that one farmer will sell more and more tokens over time, or once they are in, they are done unless they expand their farm? It's the former. So with the soil carbon removal, you can continue to, over time, remove more and more carbon dioxide and store that in your soil. And Alden mentioned uploading your data every year and having that verified every few years. That would show the new CRC. So every time that verification happens, you would have new CRCs created that could then be sold in the queue. Can suppliers pay to have their CRCs show up earlier in the queue? This is like the Yelp model. That is an interesting question. My gut reaction is no, but all ideas are worth considering. Why the queue? Why not provide Nori tokens as soon as a CRC is verified? The problem with that is that we're talking about a fixed supply of these Nori tokens. Let's say we did it this way. Let's say that every time a CRC was created, that supplier then sold that, and then Nori paid that supplier a Nori token. And then Nori held on to the CRC and then sold that to a buyer in the future. So that'd be having Nori act as like the real middleman in this scenario. There are a couple issues with that we're trying to avoid. So we considered this. We have two options in that case. We can either mint a new Nori token and use that to pay the supplier, which increases the overall supply of Nori token, which inflates the token, which would have an effect of pushing the price of the token down, which is not what we want to see happen. The other option is that Nori could retain a certain number of tokens and use that pool to be purchasing CRCs from them. But that means we can only purchase as many CRCs as Nori tokens that we have, which means that we're limited on how we scale up the marketplace. So we believe that by instead matching buyer with supplier, and actually Nori never takes ownership of either the token or the CRC. This is what's called in software an atomic swap, which means at the exact same time, the ownership transfers from the buyer to the supplier of the token and from the supplier to the buyer of the CRC. That's a way that we avoid those issues of either inflating the currency or Nori having to have such huge capital reserves that the market can only grow as fast as we do as a company. And we want it to grow faster. What scale of buyers, sellers, available CRCs do you consider optimal? How big does the market need to be to start, and can it just get exponentially larger? The optimal question is a good one, and that remains to be seen. And we're working on trying to model that out because that's important for us to know to help decide how many tokens do we create and how is this monetary supply changing over time. I don't have an answer for you, but we do expect to have some initial results from our investigations into that very soon. And we might even have that discussed at some point tomorrow on one of the panels. How big does the market need to be to start, and can it just get exponentially larger? Well, we think that there's like I mentioned, the whitelisted buyers. As long as we can meet that whitelisted buyer demand and have that kind of continuing to grow at a small pace, take small steps in that, then we're ready to launch. And can it just get exponentially larger? Absolutely, that's the goal. Nori wants to commoditize carbon. But verification of soil, for example, may cost less than verification of geological storage. Doesn't this bias Nori toward wanting soil projects in their queue? That is an interesting question, and that refers to one of the insurance mechanisms that we've been talking about. So why don't I just explain it in brief? You can add on, and Christoph, you should go to her with the mic. One of the other insurance mechanism that we're considering is, especially with these more ecological methods of removal and storage, and when it comes to soil carbon removal, the way that we verify how much is in there is going to, the amount that's verified is going to increase in precision over time. Because as more time passes, we'll have more data that we can insert into the model through our data aggregator partners, and then we can ensure that the carbon is there. And we'll be more confident of that as more time goes. So one of the mechanisms that we're considering is when the buyer purchases the CRCs from a soil carbon remover, the tokens transfer and the buyer receives all the CRCs. Buyer's done. But a portion of those tokens that are meant for the supplier are owned by the supplier, but are limited in the software to become what's called non-transferable, meaning they're your asset that you can report on your books as an asset, but you can't actually do anything with them until more auditing and verification happens at later periods of time. Now that introduces different levels of verification, because if there are levels of verification that can prove with more precision that the CO2 is in the ground, then that's more valuable than the less precise methods of verifying. And so that's where we expect that different methods of verification will compete with each other on their marginal cost. So if you're a verifier and you've come up with a more cost-effective way to prove it, and working within the development of this methodology, which happens by the community, then that actually is going to make that possible, so that removes as much as possible and mitigates the risk of us being biased towards one methodology or another. We want to remain agnostic as much as possible. Do you envision a future where Nori tokens can be used in regulatory marketplaces like California? It's not in our roadmap. I think could be possible would be regulatory market participants being given the option of purchasing Nori carbon removal certificates and having those meet whatever their emissions reductions obligations are. We would rather focus on building out our voluntary marketplace and having everything be market-driven and let the government jurisdictions come to us rather than go the other way around. Because we think that that gives us the best chance to scale as large as possible and make more of an impact. We think it'd be more efficient. Are Nori tokens burned when redeemed for CRCs? No, actually, the supplier now has the Nori tokens, and now you can use those to sell them for another currency. Will the available total supply of Nori tokens always be a 1-to-1 ratio of CRCs verified by Nori? So if this is asking, will the exchange rate always be 1 Nori token for 1 CRC, the answer is yes. But the number of Nori tokens will be relatively fixed, whereas the number of CRCs over time should hopefully be a really big number. So those aren't directly linked in that way.
Okay, so thank you for filling out the feedback cards. We did it for a reason because we wanted to collect more than just questions. But I'm going to open this up to the floor, and I'll walk around with a mic for you guys to ask any more questions or give any more comments. And then we'll wrap up for the day. That's pretty much it.
I think my card was one of the last ones in. I was curious about other environmental markets credits that might be more geographically constrained, like wetland mitigation banking, and if the idea potentially moving forward is to host those other credit exchanges on this platform, or if you're going to stick to carbon for now.
That's an interesting question. We've started talking about that internally because we're making a platform, a system that could be sort of duplicated to serve those sorts of things. Our intention initially is to focus on carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent, and that's our main focus, and it's more of a choice to focus on solving one problem first. But I wouldn't rule that out in the future, not necessarily.
Hi. So I work on citizen perception of emerging technologies, and for some people, blockchain is getting a reputation of being very carbon and energy intensive more generally. How do you have dialogue about that?
I was wondering when this question would come up. We plan to talk about this more in the morning. We're building our platform on the Ethereum blockchain. The reasons for that are because Ethereum is by far the most advanced smart contracts-based platform in existence. It has the most developer tools, the most developer support, the most investment by large corporations and interested groups. It definitely has the most momentum of any of the other blockchains. So that's one of the main reasons we're developing on Ethereum. Ethereum right now is verified, and we're going to talk about how all this works more tomorrow. So if this doesn't make sense, don't worry, we'll explain it in the morning. Ethereum is using what's called proof of work for its consensus mechanism, and the proof of work is what she's referring to that uses a significant amount of energy. These are, when you hear about Bitcoin mining operations that have giant banks of computers operating and generating a lot of heat and using a lot of energy to do so, that's what's happening to do the verification. The Ethereum community is working on a transition to a consensus mechanism that is called proof of stake, which simulates the act of having all these different parties try to find and verify the next transaction. So the energy usage of the proof of stake mechanism drops dramatically and becomes almost negligible in comparison to what's currently being used by the proof of work mechanism. The transition from proof of work to proof of stake will likely begin later this year. And so the network is going to be moving towards that and moving towards a place that is far more environmentally sustainable to support that. So there are trade-offs to choosing different blockchains, and I gave you some of the reasons why we chose Ethereum, and we believe that the community will be able to pull this off. And we, of course, if we find that that's not actually going to work out in practice, and 2 years down the road, we're still stuck with this high energy usage mechanism, we can always look at transitioning to something else that might be more effective.
Yeah, with regards to projects, protocols, methodologies, project types, you mentioned the community, open source, as well as, let's say, different levels of confidence around verification. How does that work? What's the process for getting a valid, let's say, project type that can then be verified against the Nori or the sort of the exchange, or can be listed on the exchange?
You mean like if you're a supplier and you're thinking, whoa, I see this Nori marketplace and I want to decide if this is worth it for me, like what does that process look like for them?
Or no, how does it become a valid practice or project type such that you can be listed on the exchange?
Okay.
And you mentioned open source GitHub. I was just wondering what that process is to get to a point where you can now be verified. You have a project, and I know that if I develop this project along this recipe here, then I know that it can be verified and I'll get my project, or I can get the reductions sort of listed.
Right. Okay, so in practice, what this means is that at some point, these methodologies that we have that are sort of out for review right now will become version 1 of that methodology, and then the parameters for becoming a supplier running a project on that methodology will be clear, and so you can just look at that rule set. But I think what you're asking is more about like the governance of when do we decide that that methodology is at version 1? Well, that's still an open question, and that's where we want feedback from you all. We want to be having that conversation. Ultimately, it's up to us as the owners of the repo and operators of the marketplace to decide that this is there, but we don't want to be dictatorial about this. We want to have that input. So this governance model is still being worked out, is kind of the best answer I can give you right now.
Thanks very much. Just a question about the ongoing verification work. Are you envisaging verification of practice or verification of monitored outcome? And what I mean by that is, are you envisaging that you'll verify that farmers have done what they have committed to, or that they will need to then provide their own soil organic carbon measuring data?
Both, yeah, it's both.
Okay, so then the second question is, so what's your view then of the trade-off between the cost of measuring versus a kind of proxy as a kind of practice-based model?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is this place where it sounds like we're being secretive and we're not, but we're trying to create a standard which is transparent. Imagine looking at a website one day and it's got project types down one column, and then maybe 4 columns, 4 very different considerations that contribute to the estimation error as it relates to the carbon stock enhancement estimate, of which one column is the quality of the verification of the claim. It's not the only column. And we publish it, and in each column, each factor gets a weighting, which then the community will debate continuously. And so you can see very transparently for each combination of choices a vendor might make in terms of what they report, what they don't report, the quality of the verification. They will get, the CRC we're imagining would be, we call it tiering. And a CRC with a 80% estimation error range, when it gets transferred to a buyer, will translate into, we haven't made these decisions, this is just to illustrate, 20 Nori ton, or 20% of the Nori tons immediately tradable, 80% in reserve. And when the full claim is fully verified in an audit 10 years later, these 80% of tokens are released and saleable. You as a vendor may have the option 3 years from now, because the token prices are high, to go do some aerial and start doing some soil samples, more expensive verification, to pull those tokens out of the reserve account earlier. So we're trying to design it so that when the token price goes up, the market participants have the option but not the obligation to upgrade their reporting and verification standard to pull those tokens out of reserve. And we're doing it that way because we're hoping that designing the mechanism that way is going to really incent the market to innovate, adopt new technologies for measuring, and create a competitive impetus. The other thing we're doing there is in traditional markets, two things are true. In traditional markets, because that real risk exists, and so you see, when you talked about discount, if we do this right, the geological sequestration project is going to have a lot less risk or uncertainty associated with it, so you won't be subsidizing the projects with higher risk. But what we are saying is in traditional markets, two things are true. For these kinds of projects, the way the market administrators, both voluntary and compliance, try to manage risk is they force the vendors to put up to 20 or 30% of their carbon reduction claim in a buffer account. And they also stipulate that at that 10-year audit, if the CRC buyer, if bought more CRCs than carbon was actually sequestered in California, that buyer is obliged to go to the market and buy allowances or credits to make up the difference. We're saying, no, we're not laying that, that liability on the buyer. And the reason is, in my view, that rule making causes the whole buyer market to assign a huge discount to the price they're willing to pay for the soil removal, a disproportionate discount. So if we pull that out, we think the market price goes up just by definition because they're acting very conservatively, quite reasonably. The other thing we're trying to say is that asset, that those tokens that are in the seller's account and are not tradable are still an asset that belongs to the seller. So you've all got bankers, you've all got lenders who know what a restricted asset is. They don't value it at zero. So, you might have covenants that preclude you from using certain cash, but when you go to borrow against your balance sheet, it's still a value. And we're trying to make sure that everything we do that creates a reserve to cover the risk is leaving the vendor with an asset, as opposed to taking some out of it, something away from you. So it's leaving the vendor with an asset, it's putting a tiering system in place that gives you the option of pulling more out of the restricted account if the price and innovation in measurement progress adds up. And it's not causing the buyer to have any liability, so they don't hit you with that massive discount that you see in traditional markets to date, which is reasonable for them to do given the model we're trying to do differently. Was that clear enough, or was that confusing?
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna do Greg, and then we're gonna wrap up. Okay.
I thought that the idea this morning was really compelling of paying for storage rather than removal. I think storage is a much more reasonable thing and still does the same job functionally. But storage doesn't seem to jive kind of with what you described, since because you're retiring those CRCs. So I'm wondering, like, does this work with a storage-based concept as compared to a removal concept, or would you have to significantly change things to make that work?
We see those as one and the same.
So, like, for example, if I store carbon, let's say I have a field that's 5% carbon, and somebody says, all right, I say I'm going to keep it at 5% for 10 years. There's value in that. Even if after 10 years I remove it all, I've stored value for 10 years. That's a fundamentally different kind of claim, but still does progress things if everyone's doing it effectively. That feels like a more realistic option. I'm just wondering.
Can you clarify the 5%?
Sorry, 5%. I have a field. It's 5% carbon at day 0. And in 10 years, it's still 5% carbon, but I've stored it all there. I haven't released it, right? Like, would I get value for that? Because I'm reducing the cycling, and therefore, if a lot of people did that, it would still have the net outcome, and it doesn't require the retiring of CR. Like, there's a whole...
From the very beginning of Nori, we made a choice, a decision, that we were going to focus on carbon removal because no one else is. And so there are 1.5 trillion tons out there that have to be removed, and there are lots and lots and lots of other attempts that other market players are making at preserving and avoiding emissions and so on. And so we made the decision to focus on removal so that we can accelerate that process. So in this case, it's, we're sticking with the removal focus.
Could I ask what something else? It also depends on your baseline. If everybody else in your ecosystem and soil type is depleting the carbon stock and you're maintaining 5%, that's incremental.
So you're going to have something that's like the common practice baseline in forestry? Oh, rather than against your soil. And how do you determine common practice?
It's avoided conversion.
Now, and if everybody else is increasing up to 7%, you're maintaining at 5%, you're probably not a registered project, but when I told you, if you're a registered project and that's what's happening, your baseline's going up in our books. Baseline relative to which your performance is being compared.
Okay.
I think we'll probably end up talking more about that during the soil panel tomorrow.
And I apologize, we were trying to figure out what to bring into today and tomorrow and what to leave out. Sorry about that.
There's a happy hour coming up. You can talk about it then.
Yeah. I'm going to do one last question with Donald back here. Feel bad.
So I'm going to give you some fodder to think about tonight from the perspective of a farmer. Number one, you guys are so damn far into the weeds, I'm not interested in participating because I don't even know what the hell I'm offering. Number two, you don't offer me a contract at the end of April and expect me to wait until May 8th to find out whether or not I'm in the system or not. So I would offer that for the supply side of the equation, you need to get your verification system down to the extent of looking at what happened in 2017 as a process, because you can come and sample my farm as many times as you want for soil organic matter, and it won't change in 3 years because you can't sample the same place twice. And the reality is you're verifying a process, and you can do that by satellite. You then have to trust that the COMET model has done its homework and the science is true, and that soils are still going to retain soil organic matter following the right process. You're not going to measure it because you haven't given it enough time to happen. And on the other side of the coin, you send out an auditor to my place in May, he better damn well know how to put in a drop boat because I ain't got time to talk to him. So your realities of trying to find a computer technology to fit a problem is already causing me problems if we don't actually solve at the very front end what it is you want. And you want a reflection on history. And you're going to have to seal this off with every year because, again, I can rent land from anybody in this area or in this room. Problem is, we might disagree. How do you clear up those transactions if you've held back on something? Because in farming, I will guarantee you a permanent reduction when I do nitrogen or do methane destruction like anybody else. But when it comes to soils, it's a long-term run, and it needs to be looked at 1 year at a time. And now you got to decide, was it my process, or was it the landowner that gets the credit because they wanted me to do this? Because in the state of Iowa, the last time I heard, 66% of the land is not owned by Iowans and it's not owned by farmers. Probably in New York and it's probably in Los Angeles. But the reality is your system has to go back and look at what happened last year through satellite imagery I can't change the precision ag data that comes out of the combine or out of the tractor, and there'll be more and more of that available with time. So you need to illustrate to me trust first of all. Otherwise, I have no interest in playing in this system. Because I can contact my elevator right now and sell 5,000 bushel of number 2 yellow overnight and know that I'm going to get $4.72 a bushel for it this fall on corn. If I can't do that with you, I don't have an interest. My interest is in maximizing value because those numbers up there are too damn small in today's agriculture to be bothered messing around with if we don't have absolutes to deal with today and now. Because blockchain can maximize this and bring efficiencies, but not as you're defining it now.
Okay, thank you. Well, we want to talk more with you about that.